Welcome to Koyunopm Project Management, the risk register. So when we start out with the risk register, we're going to use just a standard template. In this case, we're going to use Microsoft Excel. The first thing I'm going to do is change out sheet 1 and call it risk register. Then we're going to go ahead and add in 4 column titles. The first one's risk ID number. The second one's risk category. The third one is risk title. And the fourth one is risk description. Okay, then what we're going to do is take the risk category and we're just going to extend that. And the risk description, we're going to extend that. Then we're going to go ahead and remove column A and just delete that. Now what I'm going to do is enter in 10 unique ID numbers, 1 through 10. So the risk ID number is meant to be unique for every risk. Small projects, you may not have many risks. Large projects, you may have hundreds. This depends on the size and the complexity of the project that you're doing. But the key is to make sure that you have a unique ID number so that you can go and reference them in the future. You don't ever want to get rid of a risk. You're always going to want to maintain them because it becomes a good historical database for you as well. The risk category is basically a categorization of each of your risks. And so the risk category we're going to use for this one specifically is going to be test. And it could be quality, it could be manufacturing. The next one's risk title. And this one we're going to go ahead and call qualification failure. And we're going to go ahead and extend the field just so that it fits. And then the risk description is just a description of the risk. So in this case, our risk description is going to be hardware fails qualification testing. Now that we have this information, we're going to go ahead and add in a risk owner. The risk owner is important because as a project manager, you are 100% accountable for your projects. Whether it's your fault or not they fail, you're responsible for that. Most important things you can do as a project manager is create accountability on the part of your team members. It's all fine and well that the project manager is accountable, but if the rest of the team care, you're not going to be successful. So to do that, you create the accountability by having people submit their estimates, take ownership of specific risks. And so in this case, because it's a test risk, we're going to have the test lead take ownership of this. And the reason that is they say, yes, I will take responsibility for this. Now they've created a sense of accountability on their part to make sure that this doesn't become an issue. The person we're going to go ahead and put here is James DeWitt, or the test lead. Just going to extend that field. So now we have the basis of the first risk. It tells us what it is and what its title is, who the owner is, and what category it falls under. Now we start getting into the analysis portion of the template. And the first thing we're going to look at is a qualitative risk analysis. And this is going to include your probability of occurrence, and we're going to use a scale of 1 to 5. What does 1 to 5 do for us? It gives us a scale of 1 being it's very unlikely it's going to happen, or very low possibility, and 5 being this is pretty high, this is something that could really happen. And what we're going to do is we're going to extend the field just a little bit, but then we're also going to go ahead and wrap the text. So we jump this up here. Okay, the next thing we're going to incorporate is a potential impact, and that's going to have a scale of 1 to 5 as well. We're going to wrap the text on this one. Get there. And then the third field is a predicted risk total. And then we go ahead and wrap the text here. All right, so in this case, we're going to look at the qualification failure and see what's the probability of it occurring. And we're going to say it's probably not a 1, because that would say it's unlikely to happen. And it's probably not a 5, that is pretty common for this thing to occur. Okay, it's probably somewhere in between, so we're going to give it a 3. And remember, when you're looking at qualitative, it's pretty subjective. And then you've got your potential impact. In this case, if we have a qualification failure, that could be a huge impact on the project, so we're going to give it a 5. And then the predicted risk total is a simple multiplication of the probability of occurrence and the potential impact. So we say equals probability of occurrence times potential impact. And that gives us a total of 15. And we're going to go ahead and color this red. So what did we just do? Well, we looked at a probability of occurrence. We said it's about average. We have a potential impact, which we're saying is high if it occurs. The predicted risk total is 15. So the universal colors for the risk register are red, yellow, green. And so green are low risk. So I would say 1 to 6. Total predicted risk total between 1 and 6 would be a green. Say 7 to 14 is a yellow, and then 15 to 25, which is the max, is a red. The occurrence and the impact, you could use a scale of 1 to 3. Some organizations use more than 5. It's totally dependent on the organization and your projects, how you want to manage them. And the same thing with your colors coding. I mean, you could change it to 16 instead of 15 and make that red. It's totally up to how you want to do your risk management. In this case, we're going to say 15 and above is a red risk. As a project manager, you're going to manage all risks. You need to make sure even the green ones are mitigated as best as possible, because green ones can impact you just as much as red one. Now, the impact may not be as high, but they can still hurt a project, okay? And so it's important that you track all of them. The risk owners need to be responsible for the risk they have, but then management is going to be looking more than likely on the red risk. That's where their interest is going to lie, and they're going to want to make sure that you minimize the chance of those becoming issues as much as possible. And that's where their focus is going to be on. So now that we have our predicted risk totals, the next thing we're going to add in is a mitigation plan. And this is going to be a description of what we're going to do to try to mitigate this risk from becoming an issue. It's also a mitigation plan of, okay, if it does become an issue, what can we do next? So for the sake of space here, I'm just going to focus specifically on how do we stop it from becoming an issue. And what we're going to put in here is that we're going to conduct some prototype testing. If that's successful, we will then conduct some development testing on the initial hardware. And if that's successful, then we're getting into qualification testing, so that we have 2 different steps beforehand to try to mitigate that risk from becoming an issue as much as possible. And so we don't want it to go too wide. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and capture column I. I'm going to go up here and wrap text. And that will, as you can see, expand the cell so that we can put more information and just not go as wide. So now that we have qualitative risk analysis and a mitigation plan completed, the next thing we're going to do is develop the quantitative risk analysis. And we're going to start with the predicted risk. And we're going to use a 1, which equals 3%, and 25, which equals 75%. And we'll talk about this as once we've completed these 4 different columns. The next one's total impact, if the risk were to occur, risk reserve, and running risk reserve. So the predicted risk is going to be a multiplication again. It's going to be a multiplication of equal sign, predicted risk total, times 0.03. You could change it, you could increase it, you could shrink it, however you want to use that within your organization. The total dollar impact is, if this risk were to occur, what's the total impact this could have on the project? And we can say, in this case, the total impact could be $500,000. And we're going to go ahead and remove the decimal spaces. So we have a $500,000 impact. So what that means is we could spend as much as $500,000 trying to resolve this if we have a qualification period. That's a big deal. And then the risk reserve is a simple calculation of the predicted risk by the total dollar impact. So it's equal sign 45 times all the predicted risks times total dollar impact. Okay, and that gives you $225,000 risk reserve. The running risk reserve is a simple calculation of all of the risk reserves totaled up. In the next field, it's going to be an addition. So it's going to be the risk reserve of this particular risk item plus the total running reserve from above it. And so if we have, let's say this risk here is worth $100,000, you can see our running reserve just increased to $325,000. So now we have running reserve of $325,000 that we need to set aside on this project to cover our risk. All right, so what did we just put here? So some organizations will look at the $500,000 and say, okay, you know what? We don't want any risk on this project. You tell me every risk and what the potential possible amounts are for each of those risks, and we'll set it aside. That way we know we'll stay within budget, and if any issues come up, then we have a reserve set aside to support those. Not all organizations are like that. Many will look at this and say, you know what, you don't need a risk reserve. It's perfectly fine. You're going to be successful. You don't need to worry about risk reserve. We're not going to set any aside. And so what that means is when you have an issue on your project, which you will, you won't have any funding set aside to manage those risks, which can be a big problem on your projects. So it just depends on how risk adverse an organization is. And then you've got somewhere in the middle, which is organizations that say, you know what, we can't set aside the full amount because it would just be too much, but we can set aside a smaller amount that's based on a percentage of each risk of what you think it's going to be in terms of how likely it is to occur. And so in this case, that's where we get our risk reserve from. We have our predicted risk of 45%, the total impact of 500,000, and so our risk reserve is 225. And so what we would do is we'd set aside that 225,000 as part of our risk reserve. And at the end, once we have this list of risks identified, we share that with management and say at the beginning of the project, this is the total risk reserve we'd like to set aside on the project. And they can look at it and say, okay, we can accept that, or no, you need to reduce it some, or you know what, maybe we can add a little bit more to that. But the bottom line is it gives you a risk total that's based on a predicted risk assessment in terms of probability of occurrence. Now we're going to go ahead and create a risk warning and a risk trigger. So when should we manage our risks? You should be checking it regularly. Okay, as the PM, you should be responsible for all the time. The risk owners, they should be responsible for keeping up with their risks. But some projects, if we're looking at agile projects where it's 2 to 4 week increments, obviously if an issue happens, it's going to be very quickly. The time frame of the work is quick, and so you should be managing your risk pretty much every day. On the other hand, if you're managing a project that's say 2 years, 8 years in terms of total length, you may not see some of these until towards the end. So it's not going to make sense to keep tracking on a weekly basis. But what can help is if we create risk warnings and risk triggers. And so a risk warning, if it happens, it's not a definite guarantee that we're going to have a qualification failure going forward, but it gives us a heads up that if we keep down this path, we will have a failure in the future. And so our risk warning is going to be, we fail prototype testing. So we fail prototype testing. And what does that tell us? Well, that tells us, okay, we just had a failure in prototype testing. We need to go back and take a look at our design. We need to figure out what's going on with this thing, because if we keep down this path, we will have a qualification failure. So it's like a 30% heads up that, hey, we're moving in the wrong direction right now. But it also gives us enough time to fix the problem before it becomes an issue. Now, a risk trigger is more like your 90% probability. It's not a guarantee, but what it is, it gives you a notice that, if this happens, it's very likely you're going to have a qualification failure. And so if you fail development testing, obviously that's a big deal. If that occurs and we move straight into qualification testing, we're not going to pass. Okay. This is probably going to be some redesign. It's probably going to mean we're going to have to look at something, whether it's software or hardware or a combination. But that's a big deal because development testing is closer to that point where you're going to start getting into qualification testing. Between development and qualification is a short time frame. And so we really need to get that under control, and that's what the risk trigger tells us, is that if we don't get under control, we're more than likely going to have a qualification failure. And the last thing we're going to incorporate here is a status. And the status just gives us basically a reference of 3 items. One is that open. So in this case, we're going to start out with the risk being open. Now, if we get through qualification testing and everything looks successful and we don't have any problems, we can say, great. We don't want to get rid of this risk because this will be good historical for future projects, but we can close it. And so in this case, we'll just change the status to closed. Well, what happens if we get into qualification failure? We do have a failure. Okay, now it's become an issue. And so that's how third status is issued. So now that we have the status complete, the last thing we want to do is just format this document so that it can be even more powerful for you. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove row 1. I'm just going to delete that. I'm just going to shrink this whole thing so we can see it. Okay, I'm going to scroll up to the left, shrink it a little bit more. Okay, so now we can see the whole thing. I'm going to just expand these fields so you don't get rid of the hashtags. Then I'm going to go ahead and highlight all 10 rows plus the top row. And we're going to go ahead and just structure this. So we're going to put all borders, and then we're going to do thick border. Then I'm going to take this top section and I'm going to bold these. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to bold these. Okay, and I'm going to center these as well. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the same top section again. Actually, this time I'm going to go to data and we're going to filter it. So what does a filter do? Well, it just helps us organize this. When we only have 10 risks, this is easy, right? We can see all 10. But if we say we have 100, it's a lot easier if we can filter out this information so we can figure out how to show it. So, and I'll give you an example. So the status, let's say this item here, What I can do with a filter is simply filter out what I'm looking for. So I'm going to get rid of select all, and I'm just going to say all I want to see is what open ones we have. And we click it, and bam. Okay, so it only shows me what's open. Or I can say the only thing I want to see are the issue ones, not the open one. Click that, it shows us the issue. And then I'm going to show, well, let's just select all of them so we can capture everything. Okay, and so you can see how that all comes out. Now, once this becomes an issue, we have to transfer this risk over to the issue log, and that will be a separate video. But for the time being, this gives you what your risk register should look like. And just remember, you have open, closed, and issue as part of your status. The last thing we're going to do is go to View, and we're going to go ahead and freeze panes. So we click Freeze Panes, and we're going to specifically freeze the top row. And what does that do for us? Well, now if we scroll down, let's say we have 30 risks, you can see the top row stayed where it is the whole time. I hope you found this tutorial useful. This tool has helped me numerous times throughout my career, and so you should be able to use this in any industry, on any project. I wish you all the very best, and good luck. Thank you for watching this episode of Koyunopm Project Management. If you have questions or are interested in additional support, feel free to reach out. For additional videos, tools, and other material to include recommended reading, please visit the listed YouTube page. If you don't see a video or tool that you're interested in, send an email and request it for future edition. Once again, thank you for watching Koyunopm Project Management, and have a great day.